no matter what you're trying to achieve, they're not mutually exclusive. And I think people fail to see that sometimes, that sustainability and economic success are actually tied. They're not exclusive to each other. They're very much aligned, because if you do something that reduces raw materials, you get your cost down. If you do something that reduces the amount of energy, then your input cost is down as well. So there's all of these things, but the output of that is a better impact on the environment, better impact on decarbonisation.
Welcome to the Trend Detection Podcast, powered by Siemens. And now your host, Niall Sullivan.
Hello, and welcome to the latest episode of the Trend Detection Podcast. And today, we've got a really cool topic we're talking about. It's Beyond 1%, which is a really important sustainability initiative in Australia. And Australia is going to be the focus of our conversations today. I know regular listeners will know we regularly speak to my colleague Richard Eller about, well, he's a regular, he's probably one of the most regular guests, but I'm really pleased to have one of his and my colleague as well, Keith Ritchie, on to discuss this really important topic. And it's all about sustainability and digitalization. But I guess before we go into the deep dive into the topic, Keith, it'd be great if you just sort of introduce yourself to the audience. It'd be good.
Thanks, Niall. I head up communication and government affairs at Siemens in the region of Australia, New Zealand, and the Pacific. And it's a pretty broad, very broad role with lots of exciting elements to it, and it's pretty much whatever I want to make it. And this topic of Beyond 1% has really come about through looking at what was happening with the energy transition, with the decarbonisation commitments, with the net zero commitments, with COP, and just looking at what this means for Australia, how we could participate, and what impact we could make.
Yeah, so you touched upon it then. So what were the origins of the sort of Beyond 1% initiative? How did it all start?
Actually, about 2.5 years ago, I was sitting in a large sustainability conference, and I was listening to the speakers, and I realised that what they were saying, some of the commitments that Australia has made, were put into perspective on what that means in the number of wind turbines we have to build, the number of solar panels we have to install, the amount of high voltage transmission lines we have to roll out. And I was doing back of the envelope calculations and thinking, boy, this is going to be really tough to achieve. When you put it into that context, this will be very hard to achieve. But at the end of it, if we just focus on the energy transition, what will we have as a nation? So we'll achieve the decarbonisation commitments. But what else? And Australia is responsible for about 1% of the world's emissions. And the main reason that you go on a journey of an energy transition is to decarbonise. That's what you're trying to achieve. But it's not the only thing, and it's not the only way. And we have to take a much more holistic approach. So I sort of looked at it and said, you know what, 1%, if we get to net zero 2050, it's not really a great achievement that we've addressed our emissions when we could do so much more. But how do we do more? How do we get there faster, more efficiently? And how can Australia do a lot more and punch above its weight? And I thought about the psyche, the national psyche. We're very much a sporting nation, and you would have seen that with the Paris Olympics. I think we ranked 4th in the medal tally, and we're a population of 25 million people. And according to statistics in our population, we probably should rank about 55 in the medal tally. So we punch well above our weight. And I thought, well, what if we applied that same mentality, that same mindset to decarbonisation? What would happen in this country? And so the way to get there is to really accelerate the adoption of digitalization and automation and other technologies. And if we do that, we can have a much bigger impact on the world.
Yeah, I guess before we talk about sort of digital transformation and how technology can solve it, I guess what you mentioned there, Keith, was something about a mindset shift. And I think we all know that can be difficult to achieve in itself. So could you sort of go into that in a little bit more? What mindset shift is actually required to enact this sort of change?
I think there's a couple of things. One is education. What I found by sitting in an expert conference for 2 days with 800 people who were from the sustainability industry, I found that there was a general lack of understanding of the terminology and what the commitments actually meant. So these terms like net zero at that time weren't well understood, even though as a nation we had signed up to net zero at COP26 in Ireland, net zero 2050. But if you ask someone what it meant, they were interchanging the concept of carbon neutral with net zero, and they're two very different things. So there was a mindset shift in terms of investing some time to educate ourselves on what these big commitments are. So Dr. Alan Finkel was the former chief scientist of Australia, and he was involved heavily in the energy roadmap for Australia in drafting that. And he's written a number of books, and in his book called Powering Up, he talks about the energy transition as humanity's largest economic commitment. So you start to think of this in a different way. If it's an economic commitment, what does that mean? So you really have to educate yourself and have a mindset. If you don't buy a car without going and having a look at it. You certainly wouldn't buy a house without walking through it. You don't go on a holiday without Googling the hotel and having a look at where you're going, asking friends about it. Why would you go down a path of the biggest economic commitment without understanding a thing about it? So I decided to start to really educate myself about this, and I saw that as an opportunity then to help others understand what the challenges were, but on the flip side, what the opportunity looks like if we get it right. And so we want to motivate people in that process. So you can point out how hard it's going to be, but then you've got to point out the flip side of, hey, if we get this right, what is that going to mean for us? And there's something in it for everyone. So when we talk about Beyond 1%, I was very careful to talk about things that motivate every single person, regardless of their ideology and their background, regardless of what they actually care about. So whether you're a green-hearted environmentalist, or whether you're a business person who really cares about the dollar, or whether you're someone who likes to have a strong economy so that we can have a better lifestyle, whether you're looking for a good job that pays well, all of those things are the motivating factors. So this topic actually touches on all of those, regardless of which angle you come from and what you care about. So it meets the needs of everyone.
Yeah, and what I've written down here, actually, I just wrote a phrase: different stakeholders, and that's what makes it even more complex. Like I say, because people have different agendas and different viewpoints and things. So trying to align all those together must be tricky, right?
Yeah, and I've never had anyone come to me and say, I don't like the idea. And I've spoken in a lot of different audiences, and I've had many of our senior executives and CEOs speak in lots of different audiences. And everyone really attaches to the concept in Australia of being able to punch above our weight, because we understand that when it comes to sport, when it comes to the Olympics, when it comes to anything like that, we invest in it, we commit to it, we take notice of it, and we achieve well above what we should do. And so the question is, could we do the same for the environment, for business, and for the economy? And the answer is yes, and we should.
No, I'm smiling because I really like the Olympic analogy, but I'm just hoping you don't mention cricket at any point. I'm trying to steer us away from
It's a
cricket.
bit sad for you guys.
Exactly, but we're not going to go into that at this point. We'll stick to your wonderful Olympic analogy, Keith. But I guess to shift the gear towards let's talk about technology and digital transformation. The role this plays in everything you've just said. It's certainly a team sport as well, if we want to continue the sporting analogy. But where does
Yeah.
digital transformation and the actual underlying technology sort of fit into this idea?
Yeah, so what we've sort of looked at is we said if you accelerate technology and digitalization, there's three main things that will happen. So firstly, the energy transition itself is a complex beast. And in Australia in the early 1900s, there was a problem that we tried to solve. And I'm sure everyone in the world, every country has an example like this. And the problem was that we had these beetles that were eating our sugarcane. And so we had no way to eradicate the beetles. There was no pesticides available at the time. So they decided a good idea would be to bring in a cane toad. So this toad from South America that ate these particular beetles. They thought that'd be a great idea. So they brought in a toad, which we call the cane toad, very ugly looking thing, and put it into the sugarcane fields in northern Australia, up near Cairns in Queensland. And the problem was that the beetles climbed up the sugarcane and the toads couldn't follow them. And then the toads had no known predators and they bred like crazy. And our native wildlife would not recognize what they were. And some of the animals would try and eat them, some of the birds, some of the wildlife, and it killed them because they're deadly poisonous to eat. And so what's happened to these cane toads is that they now cover 2/3 of the landmass of Australia. They were introduced in one small area and we cannot get rid of them. And you've got to be very careful with whatever we end up doing that you don't create another cane toad. So in the energy transition, it's very easy to create a cane toad because in Australia, for instance, for us to meet our 2050 net zero target, we have to triple the size of the energy capacity by 2030. And when you do that, a lot of people don't realize that that comes with everything with it. Substations that use copper and concrete, gas insulated switchgear, which largely uses a gas which is called SF6, and that's 25,000 times the potency of CO2. So, 1 kilo of SF6 gas is worth 25,000 kilos of CO2. And we'll have hundreds of thousands of these things. You start to look at these challenges and you say, well, what could technology do to avoid the unintended consequences of trying to do the right thing, of accelerating an energy transition? What could digitalization do? And then you take examples and you say, well, Siemens introduced blue gas insulated switchgear, blue GIS, which has zero emissions. So you could do that. And in Europe, they've put policies in place to phase out the use of SF6 gas. Australia could follow suit there. This would avoid unintended consequences by adopting latest technology. Another one is substations. And substations use a lot of copper and a lot of concrete. And we've got an example of a digital substation, completely different alternative in Sydney. And it avoided 7.5 kilometres of copper cabling. And it reduced concrete by 75%, and concrete is one of the largest causes of embedded carbon emissions. So you start to look at things like that. We can do that now. So a digital substation is possible now, and in just one substation, I think it's about 280,000 kilos of CO2 avoided through reduced copper, 90% reduced copper, and 75% reduced concrete. So you start to apply technology to the direction you're going, and you're going to get better outcomes and avoid those unintended consequences. And the third thing in that space is, of course, improved decision making. So grid simulation software means that you're making the right decisions and putting the right things in the right places. So that's the first part of it, is that your energy transition itself becomes more efficient by adopting technology and digitalization. The second part is when you've got massive targets, our renewable energy target is, I think, 82% legislated by 2030. So we have a long way to go. That's quite a burden to get to that point. And we can reduce the burden if we focus on energy efficiency. And again, how do you do that? Through digitalization. Energy efficiency. So you look at buildings, and we all know around the world, I think commercial buildings account for about 40% of the world's emissions. It's huge. So if you can reduce the amount of electricity that is needed to run that commercial building, then you start to ease the burden. And we've got examples here where electricity has been reduced by 80% by doing building upgrades. We have the Riverside Centre in South Australia. That's a recent one. They reduced emissions by 67.5%. And they reduced electricity costs by about 50%. So just through technology and digitalization upgrades. So you can ease that burden on the big targets by focusing on something that's less sexy, which is energy efficiency. But that is one of the three prongs of the EU decarbonisation and energy transition strategy, is to focus on energy efficiency. We just don't do it enough. So there's an opportunity to really accelerate that. The third thing is, and I like this one the most, it excites me the most, when you accelerate digitalization into industry, apart from the efficiency gains and the productivity gains, you also accelerate innovation. So companies that are highly digitalized have much better opportunities to innovate. And although we're a small nation, there's something that's happened. Most of our, I guess, industrial capability sits in SMEs. And SMEs, until recently, haven't necessarily had the access to the sort of technologies that I'm talking about. And Siemens has really started to democratize a lot of technologies. You know, we have software as a service now across many areas. Those sorts of things provide accessibility, and we have interoperability and open systems, and that's what the Siemens Accelerated Digital Business Platform is about. And so when you look at that, all of a sudden that democratization of technology and digitalization, that means that you can pull a much bigger lever on a much bigger number of companies. 90% of our businesses are SMEs, so you can pull this lever, and small businesses can actually innovate and make changes that decarbonize the world. Just changing a process, reducing weight, reducing the amount of resources required for something has a huge impact. And that's all, those innovations are beyond the borders of Australia. That's all beyond 1%. Now, it's not counted that way by the World Economic Forum or United Nations, but I don't think we should care. I think we should care about decarbonisation as the goal.
No, absolutely. And just to pick up on your point, that's a really important point around SMEs and, you know, and access to technology and skills and services, I guess, and the doors are opening. But I guess Keith, there's still barriers to adoption, you know, in a lot of different areas. Maybe you could talk about the broader issues with adoption, which is maybe stopping the acceleration of these initiatives.
Yeah, I think you've got this is a cultural shift. I believe it's a cultural shift, and it's a societal transformation. So you need government policies to support, you need educational institutions involved so that you're getting the right curriculum and you're getting the right tools, software in the hands of people who are our future generation, ways to transform the existing workforce. You've got to look at that whole piece. I was at one of our major universities last night. I'm on a panel there where I look at their curriculum and give advice from an industrial point of view. And so it's really important that companies like Siemens and other big organisations lean into educational institutions and make sure that they know the directions, that they're as connected as they can be, because we need people coming out the other end that have got the right skills to go and implement this stuff. So there's a resistance from people like engineers. In Australia in particular, we have a real shortage of engineers. So we just can't produce enough of them. So we import most of our engineers actually from overseas. But then you've got, artificial intelligence, like Siemens Industrial Copilot. That's a perfect fit where you want to you don't have enough engineering resources. So all of a sudden you've got things that can enable engineers to do more and faster and solve problems better. So that technology, you really have to take a whole of society approach to make this transformation happen. Countries like Australia and like the UK, I believe that we'll meet our net zero 2050 targets. I think some of the targets along the way will be challenging, but then there's some nations who can't get there easily. And so we have an obligation as well to do more beyond the borders of our own countries to decarbonise other parts of the world. I think, there's no point decarbonising Australia if the rest of the world can't decarbonise. And there's certainly countries who can, but there's many countries who can't. So when we can do our bit beyond that 1% for us, and it might be 2% for someone else or 5% for someone else, whatever it is, by using technology to look holistically across the life cycle of a product, the way it's made, the way the resources are used, and so on, that will definitely help decarbonise the world.
Yeah, and to your point, Keith, you're right. We're talking a lot about technology on this podcast, but yeah, at the end of the day, it comes down a lot of it down to people and mindset. And when we say people, like I say, it's not just in Australia. We're obviously talking about a global point of view as well. But in terms of, if we narrow down on, if we're thinking about organisations, you mentioned government there, and we work for Siemens, but it's not just one. The key thing is, it's not just one organisation or group of people who can solve this, right? There's lots of different,
absolutely
ways to look at it. Yeah.
I always say this to people. Siemens, as I understand it, is the largest automation company in the world. We are the largest industrial software company in the world. We're the largest electrical technology company in the world. But what we can't do is we can't do everything that's required for someone to undergo a full digital transformation in their business. And we know we can't do it all. And that's what Siemens Accelerator Digital Business Platform's about. And, apart from putting our best stuff onto that platform, it's also about creating an ecosystem of complementary and like-minded partners. So we have, I think it's somewhere around or over 400 globally accredited partners now on that platform. And I work with some of them in Australia, and some of the things that we've talked about, it's amazing what can happen when you combine Siemens technology with their technology to create some magic that otherwise wouldn't happen. There's some really cool things that can happen with artificial intelligence and automation in decarbonising the transport sector. There's lots of great things that can take place. We don't even know what they are yet, but that's where the opportunities come from. The one I mentioned, Industrial Copilot, it's a collaboration with Microsoft. We have collaborations with large companies like NVIDIA for the industrial metaverse. So creating a place where you can have a realistic digital twin of something, photorealistic, and you are eliminating problems in the process of designing it. You can get in there and immerse yourself visually, and it'll feel real. That's what the industrial metaverse is about. But it's ultimately you do it to solve problems, to get there faster, to eliminate waste, and to make things work as efficiently as you possibly can. So yeah, partnerships is key, both in those industrial partnerships, such as the landscape I just spoke about, the ecosystem within the Siemens Accelerator platform, but also the partnerships with government and with educators. That they are critical.
No, absolutely. I mean, it's great. We did a podcast recently with a Siemens colleague in the UK who's leading an initiative called Connected Curriculum, which is bringing together, academia. Seems that it's teaching the skills of AI, and it actually links to what you were saying, Keith, as well about the skill shortages and that kind of thing. And it's driving it's bringing AI and these type of technologies like Senseye, even earlier in people's career journeys and get it on their radar earlier. I guess, would you see that those kind of initiatives as sort of key to this, to making sure the workforce has the right skills, to deliver what we're talking about on this podcast?
Yeah, I'm a big believer in that. We have a lot of different university partnerships in Australia. Like I said, I was even last night on a committee meeting assessing curriculum. We've made very large software grants to a national network of universities to try and get the right tools in the hands of the students. And there's more to come, through our other software businesses, such as Brightly, which is a Siemens company, and they work in the field of asset management. You imagine asset management and the role of sustainability, where you identify assets that allow you to avoid massive capital expenditure, which might be waste if you actually have a better idea of what your assets are and the life cycle of those assets. So you can avoid both capital expenditure and operational expenditure, and you can de-risk, which avoids massive insurance premiums in the order of millions of dollars in some cases. So how do we make sure that our engineers and our there's lots of different areas of qualification that could do with those tools. Local governments need those tools. How do we make sure that people are considering that when they're going into the workforce? Well, the only way to really do it, apart from us knocking on their door and doing the marketing, is to get it in the hands of university students in the right places. Get the educators on board, get the curriculums up to speed. And we see these transformations happening all over the place. You have, one thing that I've spoken about with educators is this merger of IT and OT. Mm. So operational technology and IT is becoming more closely aligned. That's important for cybersecurity. And cybersecurity can have a terrible impact on the environment. Some of the attacks that can take place on power stations or water systems have potential for massive environmental impacts. So, helping universities to understand the pace of change. Siemens spends, I can't remember what it is in euros. I know what it is in Australian dollars. It's something like $12 billion a year in R&D, Australian dollars. That's a big investment, and that needs to be understood that we're right at the leading edge. I think recently we won the company in the EU that's producing the most patents per day. I think it was like 24 patents a day are being registered by Siemens. So it's not something you can keep up with through a textbook, which takes years to write, years to publish, and years to get in the hands of universities or educators. You have to have deep and close connections with industry partners, with universities, and we have lots of those deliberately.
No, absolutely. It's absolutely crucial. And it was really fascinating podcast I did with a guy called Steve Jones. So I'll link to that as it relates quite nicely to what we're talking about today. In terms of, we haven't talked about predictive maintenance specifically yet. And, and I was just intrigued, Keith, what you think key technology like predictive maintenance has in all of this. Bearing in mind there's different definitions of predictive maintenance, of course, in the market. But from your point of view, where does that sort of sit amongst all the other digital initiatives?
Well, imagine a breakdown in a major facility, manufacturing facility of some description, that causes an enormous amount of waste and rework. And all of that waste, all of those materials get scrapped. and that rework requires enormous amount of energy. So you start to put electrons on that, and you start to put carbon emissions to those electrons, and you soon come up with some pretty big numbers. So apart from the basic productivity improvements that you get through predictive maintenance by avoiding the downtime, you also avoid enormous energy wastage and materials wastage where that material already has massive amounts of embedded carbon. So something like Senseye is critical if you want to be on this journey. And that's why I say you need to take a very holistic approach to if you want to decarbonize. So in leadership terms, you quite often talk about the 5 whys and getting to the bottom of why you're doing what you're actually doing. It soon becomes clear that it makes a lot of sense to invest in technologies that get you to the goals of reducing your costs, reducing waste, reducing embedded carbon, reducing rework, all of those things. So yeah, I think there's a very important place for Senseye and key predictive maintenance software and tools.
And you've also you touched on, I think, with your previous answer about some of the metrics there and some of the outcomes, because for leaders to measure some of these digital transformation efforts. I mean, you've actually given some really great real life examples of successes, but it is quite a broad question. But from your point of view, Keith, what's the metrics and leaders should focus on when they're thinking about sustainability and digital transformation?
Well, you have to understand, first of all, leaders have to understand what net zero is. And so in simple terms, and versus what carbon neutral is. So in simple terms, or in the terms that it's measured, is carbon neutral includes 2 scopes. So one is the emissions that are directly an output of whatever you're making, your facility, your factory, whatever it is. And number 2, Scope 2 emissions is the type of energy that you're using to create whatever you're creating. And with carbon neutral, you can buy offsets. So philosophically, you could do nothing if you wanted to, pretty much, and just buy carbon offsets. Net zero is different in a couple of ways. First of all, it includes a Scope 3. So Scope 3 emissions is emissions in your supply chain, upstream and downstream. So what has gone into making the product that you make? Because it's very unlikely that you produce everything that goes into your product. So if you make phones, it's highly unlikely that you make the glass. It's highly unlikely that you make the steel. It's highly unlikely that you make the rare earths that go into the batteries, et cetera, et cetera. You're pretty much probably largely an assembler. So your supply chain is where all that sits. And if you don't understand your supply chain, then you don't understand the product carbon footprint of what you're producing. And that's what net zero is about, is understanding all of the inputs to make what you make and getting to the point where you say the product carbon footprint of this product is X. If the world had that today, then we would have a very different world, because at the moment we don't really know where most of our emissions sit. So measuring that is really important, understanding that is really important, and there's legislation that is forcing that, and then there's social requirements as well, where people start to become more educated and they say, well, this is being sold as a clean green product, but actually it's not so clean and green because in the supply chain there's a dirty factory and there's something or other else overseas and it had to be shipped 10,000 miles in bad conditions using poor fuel, et cetera, et cetera. So you have to get that supply chain view. And philosophically speaking, there's a difference with net zero as well. The idea is that you get your operations as efficient as you possibly can before you revert or rely on purchasing carbon offsets. So they're the differences. So you need to understand that. And as the world starts to understand that, because a lot of people still don't understand that, as the world starts to understand that and starts to measure that, then you can start to reduce emissions along the entire supply chain and the entire life cycle of a product. That's the other thing you have to look at, is what's the life cycle. So what happens at the end of life of your product? Does it get buried in landfill? Is it recyclable? Are you part of that process? Like, what's your responsibility in that look like? Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting. I guess you sort of answered a little bit my next question at the end there, because I was going to ask: is there's still a lack of understanding about an organisation about their carbon footprint, and maybe some of the reasons why? Is it because it is so complex, or are there other reasons? Do you think, Keith?
It's not really been a requirement until recent. So a lot of countries have got legislation that's either kicked in or kicking in. So it will get to the point, because we're all part of someone's supply chain, basically, it will get to the point where companies will force an outcome, because there'll be decisions. If they've made a commitment to become net zero and they've got two choices or three choices or multiple choices of where they get their materials from, then they will have to choose the sources of materials that are already decarbonising their processes and systems. I was talking to one of our Siemens global executives last year, and he said he can't get enough green steel. So this is one of the things. How do you look holistically? So they're definitely looking holistically to make sure that they decarbonise the entire process. We have technology, for instance, in Patrick's terminals in Sydney, which is one of the most advanced ports in the world, using digital twins, using automation technology, and they've been able to remove the equivalent of 450 diesel trucks off the road every day. So you start to look at these things. That's in everyone's supply chain. So this is great. We have examples of, I mentioned this innovation. We have a great example. I was with the owner of this business recently of automation innovation. And they said they looked at what they could do, and they said, I think we could clean the bottles, the molds that make glass bottles. We could use lasers to clean those. And they said, well, traditionally they're cleaned with ceramic beads or chemicals. Well, both of those have a supply chain issue for a starter. You make it somewhere, you ship it somewhere, you use it, and then you have to dispose of it, whereas a laser is used on site. The other thing is that they both damage the mold. And so when you look at the process, if you want to do this without damaging the mold, well, do you care if the mold's damaged? Well, yes, it's costly over time. You have to replace these very expensive molds that make hundreds of thousands of bottles. But there's something else that happens. The cleaning cycles of a glass mold globally mean that every year it damages the surface slightly of the mold, and an extra 1 gram of silica is required to make the same bottle. And so I looked at that and I said, well, what's a gram of silica? You probably wouldn't even see it on the end of your finger. But if you start to look at how many glass bottles are made, and there's somewhere between 700 billion and 860 billion a year at the moment. And so you say, okay, 700 billion times 1 gram is 700,000 tons of silica that has to be converted into molten glass. Well, what's the energy required to do that, and what's the emissions that come from the energy required to do that? Turns out it's about 1 billion kilos of CO2 just on one measure alone. So they have solved the problem for the glass industry that has enormous potential beyond the borders of Australia. This is an SME using digital twin software, working with Siemens. We created jointly an algorithm, so some artificial intelligence that helps map the path for the laser to follow, which can eviscerate the surface material without damaging the mold. Great example. We've got lots of those examples. So technology and digitalization and AI and all the rest of it can really have a big impact on decarbonising the world much more holistically.
No, fantastic example. One of many on this podcast episode. As we sort of draw to a close, and I think you've sort of summarised it well. I wanted to end on it's been a very optimistic podcast because there's so many successes you've shared. But I just wanted to maybe, Keith, you could share, your look into the future and your optimism for Australia sort of leading the way and sort of digital sustainability initiatives. And you've given, that last answer was a fantastic example of this. But what gives you the confidence this is going to continue to progress and build momentum?
Well, I'm confident that we can do it. We do need to continue to build the momentum. That's the challenge, and not get distracted. And if we realize that this is a financial investment in our future, this is why countries want to start to make things again. There's a reason for it, and I know what the ratio is here. It's about, for every dollar in, say, manufacturing in the economy, that stimulates about $7. Whereas if you go to retail, for every dollar in retail, it only stimulates 50 cents. And you have to pay for the things that you need to pay for. So making things stimulates the core of any economy, provides better sovereign capability. And if you're doing it using technology, any improvement that you make is going to be an improvement that reduces weight or waste or use of raw materials or transport. And all of those can be measured in their impact on decarbonisation. So I think I'd like to, personally, I'd like to see a vision for Australia, which would be beyond 1%. And I'm working hard on it. We're creating ambassadors for this program, people who can talk to this as well in different areas, in different levels of detail. We recently had our global chief technology officer out in Australia, so Peter Kurter, and we presented him with a Beyond 1% ambassador pin so he can take this message to the world, because it really applies everywhere you go, and it applies to every single business that Siemens has, but it also impacts every single part of society and business in the world. No matter what you're trying to achieve, they're not mutually exclusive. And I think people fail to see that sometimes, that sustainability and economic success are actually tied. They're not exclusive to each other. They're very much aligned, because if you do something that reduces raw materials, you get your costs down. If you do something that reduces the amount of energy, then your input cost is down as well. So there's all of these things, but the output of that is a better impact on the environment, better impact on decarbonisation. We have to realise that those things are very much tied together.
Exactly, and and I think that's a key message as well. It's beyond Australia as well. Beyond 1% means beyond Australia and the rest of the world playing their part. I guess just one final question. I do this a lot. I say final question. There's one more, but the final question is: how can people find out more about Beyond 1%? Keith.
Well, I'm happy to talk to anyone about it, and of course, if they get on the Siemens Australia website, they'll find out lots about it. We've got lots of examples. Just about every reference that we make here, which is about how our customers are using technology and digitalization. Just about every reference we make can tie to this topic nicely, and we try and measure it. We put it. A lot of the times, it's about putting a different lens over the same topic to see what the impact is. That glass bottling analogy that I mentioned, they did not go out to solve this problem for a sustainability reason. They did it for a business reason. There's got to be a better way to do the business. There's got to be a better way to do this. And from me talking to them, I challenged them and said, well, what does this mean for carbon emissions, for embedded emissions across that process? And that's how we got to those numbers. So working with engineers to put a different lens over the way that they look at what we're doing and the impact that it can make. And that's really important, that we start to have a lens over things that is really holistic, and seeing the positive impact that we can make on business, the economy, society, and the environment through technology and digitalization.
Absolutely. And what a nice way to finish our episode. But yeah, so we'll provide the links in the show notes to all the information about 1% on the Siemens website as well, so people can catch up later. But yeah, for now, Keith, thank you so much for your time. and explain this fantastic initiative and all the sort of successes around it. And long may it continue as well. So thank you for your time.
Thanks, Niall. Really appreciate it. And like I said, if anyone wants to get in touch, feel free. I'm happy to talk them through what we're doing. I think this program has benefit and impact no matter where you are in the world. Your 1% might be 0.5%, or it might be 3%, or it might be 5%. But technology and digitalization is going to help you make an impact beyond your borders. You're getting things done inside your borders more efficiently, but also having that impact on the whole world. And that's the only way we can help decarbonize as rapidly as what we want to do.
Absolutely.
Thanks,
So thank you, Keith, and thank you everyone for listening to this episode, and we'll see you on the next one. Thank you very much.
Please like and subscribe on all major podcast channels, and find out more about Senseye Predictive Maintenance at Siemens.com.